jump right into it. Do we have anything aside on the secretary's side, Tom, other than just going to the minutes?
I don't think so, no.
Let's see, you would have had a chance to look at the minutes, and I'll take a motion to accept from anyone other than Dan or Bob, who were not here last month.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Janine. And a second from
Second that.
Todd, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thanks. Bob, treasurer's report.
Okay, statement of cash transactions, incoming, we just had interest for this month of $136. In the disbursements, we have our standard money to the town, that includes some credit card charges, town travel, computer work to Toshiba. The StarPoint tax collection is the payment that came into us from one of our people that we had the recovery on, and New York State Tax Department is the same, the recovery amount from that issue? Okay, so I thought. Okay, so for balance at the end of the period of $1,754,488. To the income statement, again, the same income, the administration expense and the management fee is that total that went to the town. The financial for our accountant and the attorney fees will show as accounts payable on the next sheet. We have a meeting expense of $153.72, and for a total expense for the month of $12,067. So on to the balance sheet. We've got we started with $104,687 in our checking and $1,649,801 in our savings account. You can see the accounts payable are those two numbers for the accountant and finance. We've got our bonds and the accruement for the GM litigation. All totaled, our total number for liabilities, investment, and fixed assets and fund balance of $27,682,292. Any details anybody want any information on, or questions? Other than that, that's the story. Pretty simple month.
Any questions? I'll take a motion to accept the treasurer's report.
So moved.
Second.
Dan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great, thank you.
As we look at the bills for this coming month of October, we've got the town, we have town mileage, we got Toshiba, again, for the maintenance agreement. The two numbers I spoke of for accountants and lawyers. Our NYSEG and National Grid regular payments of $100 each, and that's it. I'd like to move that we pay those.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any questions?
I would just mention the only reason my mileage is so high is for the Cooperstown trip, and I wasn't sure whether you could use the town credit card or you submitted mileage, and the answer was you submitted mileage, so it is.
Awesome. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Awesome, thank you. And we're going to take a stab at the budget, so if you find that big old sheet in your magnifying glass.
The only super minor changes since last time we looked at it tentatively was Kate confirmed that the town sort of agreed to increases were 2.5%. I had 2% in there. Now, interesting enough, one of them had been calculated maybe a bit too high, so it really, I think it was $500 or so that it tweaked the expense total, so I just simply played around with the, let's see, gain on sale of property, I think, just to make that $500. But you'll see under attorney fee, financial personal services, and the management fee, that reference to the 2.5%. Otherwise, nothing else changed. When we do approve it today, I take it over to Kate, and she kind of plays around with it and it gets sent off to Paris. This is the one sort of out-of-cycle pre-12/31 submittal that has to happen to Paris, but luckily for me, she does the majority of it. So.
Okay, so aside from as Tom mentioned, the adjustment on those numbers. Does anyone have any questions from last month? Because basically everything stayed the same. The little map change on the bond interest as well is
Yep.
in there.
Did make that, yep.
And the other things are just sort of educated placeholders from what we've done in the past, whether it's, you know, Constant Contact or what we've done to invest Buffalo Niagara or wherever, so kind of a status quo. And then as a
Mhm.
reminder, we always just make the revenue or income side balance out by an adjustment in the gain on sale of property assumption that just sort of zeroes us out for
Mhm.
budgeting purposes, but it's not exactly a goal of the year, since it's completely unknown. All right, so if there's no questions, then I'll proceed with the idea that we like it, so I'll take a motion to accept the budget as proposed.
I'll make that motion.
Janine,
I'll second it.
Dan? Any further questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Awesome. One more thing off the list. All right. Tom, I'll turn it over to you
Great.
for the administrative director side of the recap.
Should be relatively quickly. When I finish up, I do have copies for the 5 of you that are present of the executive director or coordinator evaluation form we began last year. Which again, I think is good practice, but also something that I'm sure Office of Authorities, Budget Office prefers. So this is an evaluation of me and, quote, my performance. As a reminder, next month we'll distribute the board self-evaluation, and in both cases, we take the results, collate them, and certainly present the results back to all of you. So I have those to give to you guys today. I mentioned very briefly at the last meeting that Inform Analytics that we use is sort of our objective cost-benefit analysis for projects was ending / going away. I also mentioned that there probably were opportunities at the EDC conference to take a look at alternatives. That was fairly true. It looks as if there are 2 semi-comparable products. One is from a large, maybe even nationwide, research entity that does a lot with IDAs. Ironically enough, when we talk later on about this IDA impact report, they did do that. And the other is kind of a really large, multidisciplined engineering architecture firm that does a lot with IDAs that maybe not unlike Inform Analytics created an alternative. So I would say in a very cursory look, the one from this company, MRB, looks pretty similar to Inform Analytics. Conversely, with this, I believe it's pronounced Camion Associates, they have kind of like a full-on research, think Yahoo type project, and what they call a more simplified, research effort. I don't know that it ends up giving you per se a ratio like Inform Analytics did, but it certainly does take a look at all the different components. So I'm just letting you know those are the 2 choices. I am in the process of asking both of them for formal proposals so we can see. There's a little bit of discussion at EDC, probably on the Camion side, because maybe people had bought their full-on research in the past and knew it was a hefty sum. But a lot of, hey, you're going to have to tweak your prices and be more competitive and so on and so forth. So there are 2 choices. I imagine, if not in November, certainly by December, we'll have one to recommend and show you kind of examples of the finished product. So, but it was certainly something everybody was kind of paying attention to. There was a significant market share that Inform Analytics had. I had not sent you, let me start with Orange County IDA. I was not at all aware of this. This was also sort of the talk of the conference. I can get you the articles if you'd like to, but it's so bizarre and not applicable, but I thought I'd mention it just because it really is getting significant statewide press. And I think I'm also somewhat nervous that we can expect the authority's budget office or controller to assume that all IDAs are organized and function this way, and therefore, we better overlay a ton more regulations. But in a real simple nutshell, because again, it doesn't apply to us, an IDA in Orange County created a secondary company that they used, maybe not unlike if we had gone ahead, those who had been on board for a long time ago, years ago, with an incubator project. So they created this new company around an incubator. It's hard to describe because all of us will just sit there and say, well, of course not, they didn't do that. So the gentleman that they put in charge of the incubator company was on the main board, paid him outrageous amounts of money, like $1 million plus to run this little mini incubator scenario. He then went and quote unquote hired the executive director, who stayed on as the IDA executive director, to be like the day-to-day CEO, an extra $175K for this incubator company. And he then went and took his daughter-in-law and had her kind of come in and be the CFO of the existing IDA. Allegedly all the while above board and so on, and just crazy amounts of dollars flowing back and forth. My question, of course, was, well, where the heck was the external audit done? Well, evidently, when that IDA got created back a million years ago, they didn't obligate themselves to an annual external audit. Again, county IDA, super tight with the county legislature, if you will. In fact, the way this whole thing got identified was the former IDA exec became a legislator, was chatting with somebody one day and said, oh, hey, how things are going, still got like a boatload of money. I'm talking like 11 mil in the bank. And the guy's like, well, no, we're still healthy, but, we're like at like 6 mil. He's like, well, wait a minute, I've only been gone for like 2 years. How do we get from 11 mil to 6 mil? He ordered what was initially a forensic, but the county legislature got cold feet and did just a standard financial external audit, and everything I just told you transpired. But you sort of sit there and say, well, that's silly, nobody does that. Well, they do. I have a personal bias that, especially downstate, they do. In my old job, there was the company that had this massive preschool for special education. And boy, with all the stuff they did. Well, it was so egregious that the state controller went on and hired a boatload of other auditors. And every preschool that served special education in the state of New York the next 3 years was audited. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here, but, there are a fair number of, anti-IDA, anti-economic development folks that sit out there. And something like that, quote, gives us all a black eye, even though it's, again, structurally and ethically so different than how we would function. But I thought I'd let you know about it. It was not on my radar screen before I got there. And the funny part, is a lot of the remaining Orange County IDA people were there at the conference, and they were good. Stiff upper lip, that didn't involve us. We're just going to move forward. And, hey, did you hear about Legoland? And, off they went. So, comparably, I did send you, just to keep you guys in the know, the article that was in the, I think it was in the Buffalo News, but it's been in a few other places, of kind of routine Office of State Controller audits done on Amherst and Clarence. Amherst was present, I know the CEO fairly well, Dave Mingio, at the conference. I had a chance to talk to him even before this article came out. I would just reference two things. One is, in their case, here were the two dings. The first ding was, hey, at the time of application, you didn't ask the applying company for proof, i.e. like DOL forms, of existing jobs. We certainly don't do that. I'm not convinced that that's the obligation, if you will. In looking at our application, and I have Dan or Tom take a look at it, not only is there an overall attestation statement that whatever you're providing is accurate, our application not only has an employment plan that asks them to list existing jobs beyond new ones, but it also has an area where they're supposed to list existing salary and fringe benefits. And I don't remember the actual, in section 6, where they're attesting and certifying to a variety of things. One of them specifically says, say, every piece of information you're giving us on this application is accurate and, you know, kosher. So I don't know that we necessarily need to do that. I'm just telling you that was the ding and kind of where I think we sit. The other one wasn't as critical, but there is kind of an expectation that think buys and bag, that when that project is over, that we would be able to validate that lo and behold, they did spend $2 million to construct this thing. Or think back to custom laser, that, hey, we'd be able to validate that through invoices and so on, that yes, they did in fact spend $5-6 million to build it. I think there's a little bit of work to be done there. Certainly with buys and bag, I've already alerted Advanced Building Contractor to be keeping accurate records. It may be a little bit easier here because it's going to be tied exclusively to the sales tax exemption, and you know we'll see those numbers on the ST340s and simply ask them for primary backup on those. So those were the two things that you saw in the local audit. So just to keep you aware of those.
Tom, is there any way to research whether it's within just your contacts or locally or with the state, would they ever want us to start asking for the federal or state quarterly withholding forms from the company?
You mean just for their annual job?
No, and proof on the application,
Okay.
you know, because like you'd find out what their head count was on the last quarterly filing. In terms of that
Right.
black mark that
Right.
they got,
Yeah.
it would seem like
Right. Well,
we're taking them at their word, but we could,
Right.
in theory, ask them for that quarterly and be like, well, this is the number we're
Sure.
willing to work off of.
yeah, maybe you could definitely do that and add just, I forget, it's the DOL 45 or 40 or 41.
Yeah, 45
Form
on
and
the
say,
state, the 941 on the
Yeah.
feds.
yeah, maybe we can
I
do
mean,
that.
It's a little bit of extra paperwork, but
Yeah.
they've already got it.
Yeah, sure. No, that part's fine, because I think in a lot of cases, half of, and I could think in other cases where a project may be more about retention than new,
And then you could ask them for it at the conclusion of the project, I suppose,
Sure.
or annually as well.
yeah,
And just be like, just like the sales tax, right? It's a new,
Sure.
it's a new hurdle we
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
overcome.
that's okay. A couple of other real quick things. Continue to bang away on the town's website. We do have approval of what the inner page will look like for each department, so we've begun to submit. I think we've done 2 or 3 departments already. We also had to kind of create a brand-new site map, maybe just so we all keep track of what have we submitted and not submitted. So that's moving forward. I mentioned this already. In November, you will get your board self-evaluation to complete and submit, so we'll have those in the packet. I think I sent out like a 1-page quickie of really what the highlights of the EDC conference was. I would just say at a macro level real quick, for me, it was one of the better conferences in terms of blending networking opportunities and actual class time. And for someone like me that's new, and not even just locally with those Orange County people, or the guy up in Watertown, or I spent a lot of time with the gentleman from Allegheny ARC, who introduced us, was contracted from Elford State to do the job. So just a lot of business cards collected and a lot of opportunities just to see what they're doing in particular cases. Case in point, how Allegheny lost the big cheese project due to the farmer piece, and now it's over in Chautauqua, but they're still pleased, and I think a lot of the people already live in Allegheny County. So I think it was good. I, like I often do, came out with 10 items to do that came to my mind that I'll work on while we're there. At the conference, if you chose to go to the program, I didn't. I went to a competing one. They did introduce their newly completed IDA impact report. So in your folders this morning, you do have it's about a 30-page. Not really easy to see, huh? It's blue here. And again, this was done by that Cami and Associates that is one of the players in the Inform Analytics. I think it's not a terribly long read. I think it's extremely well done, both in terms of if you need some historical context, some kind of present-day context, but also some things, especially as you as board members might find interesting, in terms of some non-traditional areas that you see IDAs involved in. There's a lot of discussion about IDAs doing housing and affordable housing, especially on Long Island. It was kind of transit-oriented projects. But it also, I think, gives, quote, us a lot of pro-IDA talking points. So to that end, at 10 o'clock today, I happened to have a Zoom call with a representative from Ort's office that I've sent this to, but there were 5 or 6 other things, i.e. a couple of bills that are going to come up next year that we and businesses wouldn't be very favorable of. I won't bore you with that. And I did also email it to Norris's office yesterday. Now, obviously, they're both pro-economic development folks, but, you know, if they're interested, or I can point to them where the kind of excellent sort of pro-IDA, pro-economic development talking points are. But aside from that, you know, we always see the Office of State Controller's IDA impact report. It tends to be very plain vanilla, very kind of research focused. This is much more, it's got plenty of research and metrics in it, but it's also very much got complementary comments and so on. So I would encourage you to read it, but that did just come out. They distributed it after the conference itself. So, but yeah, I think it's really well done. The only other things that aren't on the list I would just mention is from this park update, the fall brush hogging has all been done and looks good. There's a bit of work left in the bed up on Upper Mountain Road, but I've had some communication with them already, and they're kind of aware of it. And lastly, with Beisenbag, you know, obviously the town road's done and great, and now it's no longer got a barricade in front of it. Beisenbag's retention ponds are all built and so on. And subsequent to that, I wouldn't want to guess how many loads and loads and loads and tons and tons and tons of stone that was brought in for foundational work, if you will. But now their step that they look like they've only done one so far is they're actually digging to pour the foundations that will support the steel. That's kind of what I think they only plan to get done before, quote, spring. So they're kind of trying to move ahead. There's a lot of work done to bring in, I mean, in some cases, that stone pad is 10, 12 inches of stone, and other areas like less inches, but it's, it can give you a sense of how big that, and then they've also poured the pad out there for where the other minor expansion is going. So they're making progress, but no, I think that was it. Answer any other questions you had. But,
the bird study?
yeah, I was going to do that in executive session.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Just, I don't know if I really need to, but I will.
All right. So moving on, Tom Seaman, we'll turn it to you for Yahoo discussion and Beisenbag.
So, you guys have a resolution, I think it's the
Very
last,
last page.
page.
It's two-sided.
It's pretty straightforward resolution that basically authorizes Tom Sy, your administrative director, and anyone else that needs to proceed forward with signing any documents relative to the notice of our, reacquisition of that piece of land. Basically, their original letter, I think you know this already, their original letter wanted to impose some conditions on the repurchase of that parcel of land, which we're not in agreement with. So we're just walking through the steps that are outlined in the original contract with regard to selling them the land, notice provision, things along those lines, to just kind of force their hand. Hopefully at some point they give us a phone call and tell us that we can waive some of these provisions in terms of notice, et cetera, but if not, no big deal. We're just gonna move forward with the legal requirements for notice to recapture that land. So your resolution that you see here is really just a brief outline of the history of it with a resolution that allows us to basically move forward and sign any and all documentation that will be required for the repurchase of that parcel. If you have any questions, I can answer. Otherwise, we need a motion to approve the resolution that's presented.
We don't need to read it all out or anything like that.
No, I'll be happy to if you want me to.
Will we need to do a roll call vote on?
You can do a roll call vote. It's not necessary.
Okay. My only question, just reading, was the thought at the top of page 2. Given that the merger got completed, is it still Oath Holdings, Inc.? Or did they actually change the name, or does it not matter for our purposes, because that's what we still have on the books?
I don't think it'll matter for the sake of this resolution, and I don't frankly know the answer.
They kept that in place and.
Yeah, it popped into my head that often they throw it into a new subsidiary.
They did keep that, though.
I don't know that. I mean, it's quite possible that they did, just because they had so many other companies moving and rolling and.
But as long as it doesn't matter for our resolution, then.
It won't make a difference for this resolution.
Oh, all right, so, sure, let's do a roll call, even though it's not necessary, just because it'll
We need a motion.
be, yeah.
Yeah, you need a motion to approve the resolution.
Yeah, do we have a resolution?
I'll second
Bob, thank you. And then we'll do a roll call on it, unless anyone has any questions before that? No? Okay. Dan? Aye is in favor.
Yes, aye. Thank you.
Jane?
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
And Eric is an aye. Okay, great.
Thank you. Moving on to the Bison bag closing. Honestly, my dad has been working on that for a week or so, I know, and we had a small family scenario today, so I don't have a clear update for you. I thought maybe he'd be here today, and I didn't have an opportunity to speak with him about it yesterday. All I can tell you is that the packet, which is, I think this is maybe the 3rd or 4th inducement scenario with Bison bag.
Yeah,
So we've been working off
third,
some
yeah.
previous ones. Fairly hefty in terms of the actual packet which we're getting together, and I don't know if it's been circulated to Bison bag. If it hasn't been yet, it's on the precipice.
Yeah, Dan was good to, include me on the various iterations. Tom's right, that because this is kind of the third amendment, I would say to you that 50% of the agreement is kind of just referencing, clarifying what's up with the original and initial amendment, and, but there's been a lot of activity, because not unlike most of our closings, everything from who's the current board and what are their dates of termination, all have been gathered to put into it, and so on and so forth. Just trying to think what else. There's been more done than that. I would say I was a little bit surprised that it's, maybe because of all those amendments. When you think that this is quote unquote just a sales tax inducement, it's still a 40-some page agreement. I know Dan also checked with me to make sure that some of those STs all get sent out and got submitted to the state, which we had done that work already just because they were anxious. I will say the one thing I've begun to talk to Dan about that we'll bring back to the board is, when you think, if the project cost in this is $2 million, and our typical fee is a 1% fee, well, the real maximum benefit Bison Bag will achieve is $160,000. It struck me as a bit problematic that we're gonna, on top of that, ask you for $20,000 when we quote only advance to you, $160,000. And don't forget, the legal costs incurred are separate of that. Dan didn't disagree with me. I think one of the things you all should give some thought to is, do we not care? I mean, we obviously, for those of you that are quote-unquote new, we somewhat regularly, certainly in the Yahoo cases, have voted to modify that. That's just my opinion, trying to think if I was a business person and thought, well, man, it cost me, quote, in this case, $21K just to gain, $160K of benefit. So Dan didn't necessarily disagree, but you all are the entity that will ultimately decide how you feel about that. So, give it, a little bit of thought. I did not, ahead of time, make any, quote, promises to Bag. It really was just kind of a sort of an 11th hour. Have yet to even let them know that there's a possibility that we would tweak that down, and it's really just been quote unquote internal, if you will. So, yeah, I think that's all we have on Buyers and Bag.
And Tom, they brought that up as a potential issue, or you?
They did not.
Oh, they did not.
Strictly me,
That's just
sort of
your
saying, hey, if I'm in their shoes,
Yeah, okay.
do I
Yeah.
sort of not necessarily think that was like the greatest deal, or that was expensive to achieve, but, they certainly at the time of the application see what those expenses are gonna be. And they, to Tom's point, they've been down this road at least twice before, albeit with much greater benefit because there were property tax and or mortgage recording tax exemptions, so, yeah. I do have, let's see, 3 items for executive session for consultation with attorney.
All right, can we have a motion to go into executive for consultation with attorney? Out. And do we have any last parts of, before we talk about the next meeting?
Yeah. Nope, that's the next topic.
Okay, so, next month, we would normally be here on the 11th, but that's Veterans Day, so we're scheduled for the 18th. I have come up with a conflict on that day. Bob, we talked, is okay on that day, but we need to make sure that guys are okay, so we're on a quorum plan at this point.
Yeah, it's not an issue.
Bob, Janine, Todd, Dan, you think you're okay?
Hopefully should be okay.
Okay, then you'll just be able to run it without me.
Yeah.
Todd, that'll be you.
Yep.
Good luck. Not hard to get better than me running it. All right, so then the plan will be Thursday the 18th, and still at 8 o'clock, still here. Just minus me running a clown show that I do. All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Is your performance evaluation?
Yeah.